Imagine leaving explicit instructions in your will for your own funeral, detailing exactly what you want done.
Like a checklist.
Right, exactly like a checklist. Only to have your grieving family told that some 2,000-year-old legal text completely overrules your dying wish.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds almost impossible in our modern Western culture, doesn't it?
It really does, because we live in a world where basically everything is optimized for our personal convenience. We have next-day delivery. We curate our own digital realities.
Right, everything is on demand.
Yeah, and we expect life and, well, even the end of life to be seamless, efficient, and just entirely on our terms. But today, for our deep dive, we're looking at the ultimate clash between that modern obsession with absolute convenience and an ancient, unyielding sacred law.
It creates this profound cultural friction because you suddenly have a modern mindset that views death essentially as a logistical problem, something to be solved efficiently. And that's colliding head-on with an ancient framework that views it as a deeply sacred, highly regulated spiritual transition.
And that tension, that's really the core of our mission today. We are exploring a fascinating and honestly incredibly firm piece of source material. It's an article by Rabbi Shlomo Ezagui titled Jewish Burial and the Sacred Rejection of Cremation.
It's a heavy topic, but so rich in history.
Absolutely. So we're going to dig into the theological, the historical, and, well, the highly practical reasons why traditional Judaism so fiercely opposes cremation.
Yeah.
And just to set the table right off the bat for you, listen.
Yeah, this is important.
Our job today isn't to preach. We're not taking a personal theological side. We're just here to impartially unpack the fascinating and sometimes severe logic behind this ancient tradition.
Exactly. So you can understand exactly how it works and why it matters to so many people. We're basically looking at the underlying architecture of these beliefs. Because to understand a culture, you really have to understand its boundaries. And the boundaries surrounding death in Jewish law are incredibly well defined.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the actual why, the spiritual mechanics of this prohibition, we need to grasp the sheer scale of the shift happening right now.
Cultural shift, right?
But the cultural move toward cremation in the United States, it isn't just a trend anymore, it's a landslide. The National Funeral Directors Association projects that the U.S. cremation rate is going to hit like 63.4% in 2025.
Over 60%. That's massive.
It is. Meanwhile, traditional burial is just plummeting. It's projected to drop to just over 31%.
It's a complete paradigm shift in how Americans handle the end of life.
Yeah.
And what's crucial to understand is that this broader cultural landslide, well, it's heavily impacting the Jewish community too.
Right. Which historically has maintained a very strict separation on this issue.
Exactly. Nationally, the Jewish cremation rate is now hovering around 40%. But the regional breakdown, that tells a much deeper story about assimilation.
Oh, the geography is fascinating.
Yeah.
You look at places like Dallas and Houston, and the rate is like 50%. In California, it's a staggering 70%.
Wow.
Yeah, South Florida is over 50%. But then if you look at New York, which is obviously a dense historical hub of traditional Jewish infrastructure,
It's much lower, right?
way lower. It's sitting around 30%. So it seems pretty clear that the further you get from those traditional communal hubs, the more people naturally just adopt the prevailing secular mindset of the broader culture around them.
Right. And from a halakhic perspective, meaning Jewish law, that blurring of lines is viewed as a crisis.
Because there's no wiggle room.
None. The Torah's stance on this is not ambiguous at all. It doesn't present burial as a cultural recommendation or a nice idea.
Yeah.
The text is incredibly direct. It says, "You shall surely bury him." It is a mitzvah, which translates to a binding religious commandment.
So it's not a suggestion.
Not at all. In this framework, cremation isn't viewed as a neutral alternative or just a matter of personal style. The author explains it's seen as a cruel desecration that actively denies the sacred bond between the body and the soul.
That really highlights how modern society treats the human body, doesn't it? I mean, we tend to view it like a disposable rental car.
A rental car, that's an interesting way to put it.
Well, yeah. Think about it. The lease is up. The driver, which is the soul, has moved on, so you just scrap the vehicle as efficiently as possible, hand the keys back, and crush the car.
Right, right.
But this theology views the body entirely differently. It's not a disposable wrapper. It was a sacred vessel that actually housed holiness.
That's a vital distinction. The body partnered with the soul to do good deeds.
Yeah.
So the law states that you do not destroy what once housed holiness. You must gently and respectfully return it to the earth.
But wait, if we're talking about modern society, we have to talk about the most common defense you hear for cremation.
The final wish.
Yes. It almost always comes down to, but it was their final wish.
Yeah.
People just naturally assume that if a request is written in a legal will, it becomes absolute law.
Right, and that modern assumption crashes directly into ancient legal precedent. There's an incredible case laid out in the Jerusalem Talmud, which, is a foundational text of Jewish civil and religious law compiled centuries ago.
Right.
So the text presents this hypothetical scenario. Imagine a person dictates in their will, burn my body and give my field to person X.
Which, by today's standards, is a completely straightforward conditional bequest. Any modern lawyer would execute that without blinking.
Oh, absolutely. But the legal ruling in the Talmud is that this specific bequest is entirely invalid.
Really? Just throw it out.
Entirely. And the reasoning is fascinating. They say you cannot condition a transfer of property on a forbidden act. The overarching legal principle here is that the dead do not get to legislate sin from the grave.
Now, I have to push back on this a little because if you're listening to this and thinking, but wait, it's my body?
Right.
That's exactly the modern mindset this ancient law crashes into. I mean, in our Western culture today, my body, my choice is practically our highest cultural law.
It governs everything.
It dictates how we live, our medical decisions, our privacy. So it feels completely counterintuitive, almost jarring, really, to tell a grieving family that they are literally forbidden from honoring a loved one's dying wish just because they didn't read the terms and conditions of this ancient law.
What's fascinating here is the profound philosophical difference in how ownership itself is defined. It's really the crux of the whole issue.
How so?
Well, in traditional Jewish law, a person does not actually own their body in the way modern secular culture assumes. You don't possess it as private property.
Like, so I don't own my own bone.
Exactly. You are considered a steward of the body, not its owner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And because you don't own it, you simply do not possess the legal or spiritual right to order its destruction. Respecting the dead, in this tradition, doesn't mean blindly obeying their every earthly instruction. It means honoring them as their Creator commands. The obedience to the Torah supersedes personal autonomy simply because the body ultimately belongs to God.
That is a massive pill to swallow for a modern listener. I mean, if the body isn't just an empty shell that we own and can discard at will, what actually is it after death?
That's where things get really deep.
Yeah, because when you dig into the sources, especially the writings of the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem M. Schneerson, who was one of the most influential Jewish leaders of the 20th century,
Right.
the theology gets highly mystical. And honestly, the warnings about this are incredibly severe.
They are. The Rebbe wrote extensively on this, including a very famous handwritten response regarding cremation. He explained the spiritual physics, I guess you could call it, of what happens after clinical death.
Spiritual physics, I like that.
Yeah, the belief is that the body actually retains a kind of life even after the soul ostensibly departs. The soul is so deeply bonded to the physical body that the transition isn't instantaneous.
It doesn't just snap away.
No, not at all. A portion of the soul remains tethered to the body until decomposition is complete, and even to a small degree after that.
Which completely changes the math of what happens in a crematorium. Because if the body and soul are still tethered, if the decomposition process is actually the soul's slow, gentle process of letting go of this world,
Yeah, exactly.
then a certain violent incineration is catastrophic. Ordering your own cremation means you are essentially agreeing to burn a part of your own soul. The Rebbe didn't mince words here either.
No, he was very direct.
He called this an act of unparalleled cruelty and an act of spiritual violence.
It is intensely harsh language, but he wasn't trying to be polite or soften the blow for modern sensibilities.
Right.
The halakhic argument is that fire is not a tool of purification, which, is how some secular crematories market it today. When used to erase a human being, fire is a violent rupture.
It just destroys everything.
Yes, it destroys the sacred relationship between body, soul, and the ultimate future promise of resurrection.
To help visualize this, think of the body not like a candy wrapper that you just crumple up and throw away when the candy is gone.
Okay.
Think of it more like a masterfully crafted antique violin. Even after the musician, the soul, stops playing and puts the instrument down, the violin itself still holds the resonance of the music.
I love that.
It was the physical tool that brought the art into the world. You wouldn't just toss a Stradivarius into an incinerator because the concert is over. The instrument demands reverence. It has to be protected.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The physical form isn't just a container, it's a partner. And because of that partnership, the sanctity remains.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. This concept of spiritual violence isn't just framed as a private individual tragedy for the person being cremated.
Right, it goes way beyond the individual.
Exactly. When you look at the ancient texts, this kind of physical desecration actually has massive collective consequences. It's not treated as a private family matter. It alters the physical world around them.
We see this vividly in the biblical text. Take the prophet Amos, for example. He delivers this fierce, divine condemnation of the nation of Moab.
And what was their ultimate crime?
They burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. And the scripture doesn't treat this as just an efficient disposal of an enemy king.
It's not just wartime cleanup.
Exactly. It is presented as a grave moral offense that actively draws down divine judgment on the entire nation.
And the mechanism behind that gets even more explicit with the story of King Saul. So Saul and his sons die in battle, right? And their bodies are dishonored and hung on a wall by the Philistines.
Right.
But the fallout from that disrespect doesn't end on the battlefield. The text explicitly connects that unrectified dishonor to a severe, literal famine that strikes the land of Israel years later during the reign of King David.
Yes. And the sages spend a lot of time analyzing how that works. Like, how does a spiritual failure cause an ecological disaster?
Yeah, how does that connect?
The concept is that human dignity and the earth are deeply intertwined. When the dead are dishonored, the spiritual fabric of the community is torn, and the land itself reacts.
Wow.
The earth essentially starves because justice hasn't been served to the dead. The famine only ends when King David personally retrieves the bones of Saul and Jonathan and ensures they're given a dignified traditional burial in the earth.
It's just mind-blowing to view death rituals through that lens, because today we view funerals as entirely private.
Right.
A service for the immediate family to find closure, maybe have some sandwiches.
Right. It's very insulated.
But these texts are arguing that how a community treats its dead is actually a highly public act of faith. And failing that test weighs on the entire collective.
Exactly. It's a public declaration of what a society truly values. If you treat the dead as disposable, that spiritual degradation ripples out. It affects how you treat the living and eventually the environment itself.
Well, if this spiritual cost is so incredibly high, it makes you wonder why cremation is winning out so decisively right now.
It's true.
And it almost always comes down to two highly practical American virtues. We're told it's cheaper, and we're told it's better for the planet.
Ah, yes.
Let's tackle the environmental argument first, because there's a huge misconception there.
There really is. Let's look at the actual physical reality compared to the theology. Our sages describe traditional burial using a very specific metaphor: planting.
Planting, like a seed.
Yes, you place a seed in the earth with the absolute expectation of continuity and future life. This ties directly into the belief in physical resurrection, which the great medieval philosopher Maimonides actually codified as one of the 13 fundamental principles of the Jewish faith.
Right.
The physical preservation of the remains, or at least their natural return to the soil, is tied to the mechanics of that ultimate future. Cremation, conversely, expresses absolute finality.
And when you look at the physical process, the popular narrative that cremation is cleaner and greener completely falls apart.
It really does.
I mean, cremation requires massive industrial ovens burning at nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It requires significant fossil fuels, and it releases serious carbon emissions, heavy metals, and toxins right into the air.
It's a heavily industrial process.
Exactly. Now contrast that with the strict rules of a traditional Jewish burial. There is no chemical embalming. There are no metal caskets, no concrete vaults altering the water table.
It's very minimal.
Right. It's just the body, washed and dressed in a simple linen shroud, placed in a plain pine box with no metal nails, returning directly to the earth. It's essentially the original green burial.
That's a great point.
You're choosing the gentle, natural composting of returning to the soil rather than, a violent industrial combustion.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that physical simplicity is deeply intentional. It teaches profound humility before God.
Humility, right.
Yeah, the body returns to the earth in the most natural, unadorned way possible. Industrial incineration, by contrast, relies on heavy machinery and massive energy consumption to forcibly eradicate the body.
It's almost aggressive.
It is. One is an act of yielding to nature and God. The other is an act of human hubris, trying to dominate the end of life through technology.
Then there's the financial argument. Because people argue, quite understandably, that traditional burial is expensive and cremation is just more affordable.
Yeah.
How does the halakhic framework respond to that very real modern burden?
The author addresses this head-on by arguing that cost ultimately reflects our core priorities.
Okay.
The text points out that people routinely find the resources for what they truly value in life, whether that's a college education, a home, or even, a lavish wedding.
Sure.
The author challenges the reader. Why should the final act of honoring a loved one, of securing their spiritual transition, be treated as the place to cut corners and seek a discount?
So it's about reevaluating what we consider essential.
Precisely. While financial costs can absolutely be a genuine hardship, and it should be said, Jewish communities historically have societies specifically dedicated to helping families afford proper burials.
Right, the Shevra Kadisha and similar groups.
Yes. The article argues that cost is never a halakhic justification to abandon the Torah.
And Jewish law enforces this boundary in a very practical way at the cemetery gates, doesn't it? With very few exceptions, cremated remains are forbidden from being buried in traditional Jewish cemeteries.
That's correct.
And when you understand the theology, you realize this isn't meant to be like a punishment for a grieving family. It's a theological boundary.
Mm-hmm.
The tradition refuses to normalize the active destruction of the body by pretending an urn of ashes is spiritually equivalent to a buried body.
They are fundamentally different acts. One is an act of honor and continuity, the other is an act of destruction. The cemetery's policy exists to preserve that moral and theological distinction for the entire community.
When I was reading through the sources for this deep dive, there was one particular moment that actually made me stop and reread the page.
Yeah.
Because it is undeniably the most sensitive and heaviest point in the entire discussion.
I know exactly what you're referring to.
It's the profound historical trauma associated with burning Jewish bodies.
Yes. The author references how our sages, and the Rebbe specifically, drew a direct historical link between voluntary cremation today and the horrors of the Holocaust.
It's a chilling connection.
It really is. In the camps, the murderers purposefully utilized massive crematoria to burn Jewish bodies, specifically to erase them entirely from existence. The goal was to leave no trace, no memory, no grave.
And we have to navigate this with extreme care because the author is very clear here. He explicitly states that a Jewish person choosing cremation today, out of convenience or misunderstanding, is absolutely not the same as a victim being murdered in the camps.
Right. He is definitely not equating the people.
No, but he brings it up to highlight the machinery of erasure. He's pointing out a glaring, horrific irony.
This raises an important question about historical memory. The author is trying to shock the modern reader out of their complacency.
Yeah.
The argument is about the logic of the method itself. The machinery of cremation belongs historically to a methodology of total destruction, pioneered and perfected by the worst enemies of the Jewish people.
So he's asking a brutally honest question. Why would you, as a modern free person, voluntarily adopt the exact method historically used by those who sought to erase your people?
It's such a heavy question.
It is.
Yeah.
Why participate in your own erasure when your ancestors fought and suffered so much just to exist and be remembered?
It's a devastatingly effective point. It strips away all the sterile modern marketing of cremation as a, convenient, clean option, and forces the reader to confront the deep historical and spiritual gravity of the act.
Right.
It reframes cremation from being merely a personal consumer choice into a historical echo of destruction.
So what does this all mean? When we step back and look at all these interlocking pieces, from the absolute Torah mandate to bury, to the Talmudic rejection, the final wish, the complex spiritual physics of the soul, the reality of environmental impact, and, well, the long, heavy shadow of history.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but the core takeaway is clear. Judaism simply does not view death through the lens of modern convenience or consumer preference.
No, it doesn't.
The body isn't a disposable rental car. It is a holy partner to the soul. And burying it gently in the earth is an act of profound covenant. It honors the past, and ultimately it is a deeply public declaration of faith in the future.
And that leaves us with a critical and perhaps uncomfortable question to consider as we close.
What's that?
If the way a culture treats its dead so deeply reflects its ultimate values about life, about ownership, and about the future, what do our other modern conveniences silently say about the sacred things we might be unknowingly erasing today?
Wow. That is a thought that will stick with you. It really makes you rethink that opening idea. When we demand that absolutely everything in our lives be perfectly optimized, frictionless, and entirely on our terms, we might just be incinerating the very things that make life and death sacred in the first place.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.